the 1970s, Oswald Spencer began a secret project to create the next stage of human evolution. He selected children based on their genetic profiles, intelligence, physical capability, compatibility with viral enhancement, and placed them into a controlled upbringing, designed to mold them into perfect candidates for his vision of godhood. He called it Project Wesker. Project W. The children were raised separately, educated in prestigious institutions, and observed throughout their lives. Most of them never knew they were part of an experiment. And when Spencer finally administered the prototype virus that was supposed to elevate them beyond humanity, almost all of them died. Except one. Albert Wesker survived. Tonight, I'm telling you the complete story of Project W, what Spencer was trying to create, how many children were part of the program, what the Wesker virus actually did, and why the only successful product of Spencer's eugenics dream became the man who rejected it entirely. Spencer was a staunch believer in social Darwinism who viewed himself as a visionary architect rather than a corporate executive. He looked at the 20th century and saw a world in total stagnation, populated by a weak race that had lost its natural momentum. To Spencer, the common human was a biological dead end that hindered the progress of the planet. He believed that the masses were an obsolete burden that needed to be replaced by a superior breed of humans. This ideology was the spiritual foundation for everything he built with umbrella pharmaceuticals during the 1960s. Project W was his secret attempt to force a sudden biological leap that nature could no longer provide on its own. He wanted to create a master race that could survive the coming age of global viral warfare and planetary collapse. This ruling class would possess a superior intellect and an exceptional physical capability that surpassed any known human limit. They were designed to be the gods of a new world that Spencer intended to build from the cold ashes of the old one. He envisioned a future where the weak were culled and the gifted were elevated to their rightful place as kings. The eugenics vision was not a secondary goal for the elderly founder, but his primary obsession throughout his entire life. He used the massive profits of his pharmaceutical company to fund this dark dream in absolute secrecy from the public. He believed that the strong had a divine right to rule the weak through force and biological superiority. Every lab and every virus was a calculated step toward this grand selection process of the human race. Spencer wanted to filter the entire population until only the rare individuals remained who were worthy of his immortal leadership. He wanted to be the divine father of a perfected species that would never know the biological limits of mortality. He saw his work as a holy mission that justified any level of industrial sacrifice or human suffering. He did not care about the millions of lives he destroyed to achieve his ultimate goal for the species. He was a man who had traded his human empathy for the chance to become a planetary god. The Wesker plan was the physical manifestation of his cold arrogance and his deep hatred for the biological status quo. Spencer felt that he was the only person with the iron will to change the course of human history. He viewed himself as the architect of a new reality, where biology was a tool for total political control. The project represented a final rejection of the natural order in favor of a manufactured one. He believed that by owning the DNA of the future, he would own the world for eternity. This belief was the engine that drove the project through decades of illegal research and moral decay. He was a man who saw a God in the mirror and wanted the world to see it too. Spencer discovered the Progenitor Virus in the subterranean gardens of West Africa during the 1960s. He found the ancient retrovirus within the sacred Sonnentrep flowers of the Ndipaya tribe, following the maps of Henry Travis. He believed this prehistoric organism was the fundamental clay of evolution itself. It was a prehistoric force that had the latent power to reshape life at a molecular level. Spencer saw the discovery as a divine gift from the sun that carried the secrets of the ancient gods. He believed this ancient retrovirus was the specific key to a forced evolution of the human race. It possessed a unique ability to rewrite the genetic code of any host it encountered with aggressive speed. Spencer envisioned a world where this virus would grant immortality and superhuman traits to a selected elite. He saw the virus as a biological sculptor that would carve a new race out of the stagnant human clay. For him, the virus was not a disease, but a holy sacrament of the coming age. The potential of the virus was limited only by the quality of the host it infected during the transition. Spencer understood that the Progenitor Virus was a test of genetic worthiness. If a host was strong enough to survive the initial infection, they would be rewarded with a divine power. This belief was based on the ancient legends of the Ndipaya Sun Kings who had ruled for centuries. Spencer wanted to take that tribal mystery and refine it with the precision of modern corporate science to create his own kings. The virus provided the physical energy needed to sustain a prolonged lifespan and a superior physical form. It acted as a molecular architect that rebuilt the body from the inside out. Spencer believed that by mastering this virus, he would master the secret of life itself. He saw the Progenitor Virus as the foundation for his global empire. It was the biological engine that would drive his project toward its final and most ambitious goal. He was convinced that the virus was the only thing capable of bridging the gap between man and God. He spent decades attempting to stabilize the virus so that it could be used as a controlled tool for evolution. The research was slow and involved the deaths of thousands of test subjects in the Arklay labs. But Spencer never lost faith in the potential of the prehistoric strain. He viewed every failure as a lesson in how to build a better host for the virus. The Progenitor Virus was the cornerstone of his religion, and he was the high priest of its destructive and creative power. It was the only truth he believed in. The primary problem with the Progenitor Virus was that it was almost 100% lethal to the modern host. Most subjects who were exposed to the raw strain suffered an immediate cellular breakdown. They died in total agony as their bodies were consumed by the aggressive viral replication. The virus moved too fast for the modern human system to adapt to the rapid changes. It was a prehistoric fire that simply burned through anything it touched in a laboratory setting without any mercy. Spencer realized that he could not just infect the general masses to achieve his goal for a new world. A direct approach would result in the total extinction of the human species. He understood that the virus required a refined genetic host to survive the transition. He needed candidates who possessed a rare and specific compatibility with the Progenitor Virus material. This compatibility was a genetic needle in a global haystack that Umbrella Pharmaceuticals spent decades trying to locate through data mining. The virus acted as a violent filter that destroyed anyone who was not genetically perfect. This lethality made the early research a constant cycle of industrial failure and death. Spencer watched as thousands of test subjects were reduced to black sludge by the viral load. He realized that the virus was not just an engine, but a judge of worthiness. It demanded a host who was already operating at the peak of human capability to harness its volatile power. The ancient organism refused to bond with anything weak. To solve this problem, Spencer needed to build the host before he introduced the virus. He could not rely on the random variations of the natural world to find his gods. He had to manufacture the genetic stability required to survive the infection. This realization was the birth of the project's secondary phase. He would cultivate a generation of humans who were built from birth to be the perfect vessels for the ancient fire. They would be the refined clay that the virus would finally accept. The lethality of the virus was a barrier that protected the secrets of evolution from the unworthy. Spencer saw this as a natural safeguard that he had to bypass through intelligence and will. He spent billions of dollars on medical research to understand why the Empire kings survived. He looked for the specific genetic markers that allowed the body to integrate with the virus. This search for compatibility became the focus of his entire scientific division. He was a man fighting a war against the biological limitations of his own species. Spencer chose to abduct kids rather than recruit adults. Spencer eventually concluded that adults were already fixed in their biological and mental development. Their bodies had finished the growth phase, making them less adaptable to a total genetic rewrite. He believed that the mature human mind was also too set in its ways to accept his new world order. An adult host carried the baggage of a lifetime of social and moral conditioning. Spencer needed a blank slate that he could write his own divine rules upon without any resistance. By abducting children, he could mold their young minds through a lifetime of subtle indoctrination. He wanted a generation of leaders who viewed him as their benefactor and their god. He believed that loyalty could be manufactured if the training began at a young age. These children would be raised to believe that the strong had a natural right to rule the weak. Their worldview would be a perfect reflection of Spencer's own cold social Darwinism. He was building a cult of intellect that started in the nursery. He also ensured that their developing bodies were primed for the virus during their peak years. A child's system is more plastic and more capable of handling rapid physical changes. Spencer wanted to introduce the viral material at the exact moment the host reached the height of their physical potential. This synchronization was essential for a successful integration with the Progenitor Virus strain. The children were being raised as biological assets for a future harvest. Their youth was a resource that Spencer intended to exploit to the fullest. The project required a total commitment from the candidates, which could only be achieved through a controlled childhood. Spencer wanted to own their history as much as he owned their DNA. He believed that a child who was raised in his shadow would never think to turn against his authority. They would see his vision as the only reality worth living. He was building a family of gods who would be eternally grateful for the gifts he provided. He was replacing their biological parents with a corporate identity. This decision was based on the clinical observation of host rejection in older subjects. The data proved that the younger the host, the higher the chance of viral acceptance. And Spencer treated the children as high-value investments that would mature over decades. He was a patient man who was willing to wait for the perfect moment to claim his prize. He watched them through the cameras and the medical reports, seeing them not as people, but as the vessels for his immortality. They were the future of the project, and he was their architect. The candidates for the project were not chosen through a random process. Umbrella Pharmaceuticals scouts were sent across the globe to track children born to parents with superior genetic markers. They looked for families with a history of high intelligence and exceptional athletic achievement. Spencer was looking for the elite of the human species to serve as his starting material. He was essentially harvesting the best DNA that the natural world had to offer. He wanted the genetic cream of the crop for his experiment. They monitored medical records and academic performance to find the most promising individuals. A child needed to show an exceptional IQ and a natural resistance to common diseases to be considered for the program. Spencer wanted candidates who were already a step ahead of the rest of the stagnant population. He viewed these genetic traits as a foundation that would be amplified by the viral infection. The scouts operated in total secrecy, moving through schools and clinics like ghosts. They were the silent collectors of a new era. The selection process was a cold exercise in biological data mining. Spencer did not care about the personality or the dreams of the children. He only cared about their potential as a viral host. He wanted a group of candidates who represented a wide range of human talent and genetic diversity. This variety would allow him to see how different genomes reacted to the progenitor virus material. Every child was a data point in a massive global experiment. They were numbers on a spreadsheet that represented the future of the race. By selecting the best of the best, Spencer hoped to increase the chances of a successful survival. He was trying to rig the genetic lottery in his favor through sheer industrial scale. He believed that if he started with a superior host, the virus would be less likely to consume them. The criteria were rigid and unforgiving, reflecting the elitist worldview of the founder. Project W was a project of exclusion from the very first day. He was looking for a needle of perfection in a world of biological flaws. The scouts also looked for psychological traits that suggested a strong will. Spencer knew that the virus would test the mind as much as the body. He wanted children who were independent and ambitious from an early age. These traits were seen as indicators of a robust nervous system that could handle the viral load. The selection was a multi-layered process that looked at the past, the present, and the potential of each candidate. Spencer was building a roster of gods, and he only wanted the champions. Many children were kidnapped in the middle of the night, but others were acquired through legal loopholes. Umbrella Pharmaceuticals used its massive influence to find orphans in company-funded clinics who had no one to miss them. Some candidates were the children of loyal employees who suddenly disappeared during a research accident. These families were often compensated with large sums of money or silenced through corporate threats. Spencer ensured that the children became total blank slates. Their old lives were erased in a single night of corporate action. The abductions were a coordinated global effort that left no trace of the original families. Paperwork was forged, and medical records were erased to hide the true origins of the candidates. The children were taken to specialized facilities, where their past was systematically replaced by the project's reality. Spencer wanted them to have no ties to the old world of stagnant humanity. He was their father, their teacher, and their only source of truth. He was the man who had liberated them from a mundane life and given them a purpose. The emotional cost of these abductions was never considered by the corporate leadership. To Spencer, the parents were just biological sources who had fulfilled their natural purpose. Once the children were in his possession, the parents were an obsolete variable. Some families spent their entire lives looking for children who had been renamed and moved to a different continent. It was a cold and industrial crime against the human heart. But to Umbrella Pharmaceuticals, It was just a matter of logistics and supply. The silence of the abductions was maintained through a network of front companies and private security teams. The company had the resources to make anyone disappear if they asked too many questions. This security allowed the project to operate for decades without attracting the attention of the public or the government. The children were hidden in plain sight, living lives of luxury and privilege that were built on a foundation of theft. They were the stolen gods of a secret empire. They were the property of a man who did not believe in property. Spencer viewed the abductions as an act of salvation for the candidates. He believed he was saving them from a life of mediocrity and decay. He gave them the best food, the best medicine, and the best education. He provided a world of order and purpose that the natural world could never match. In his mind, he was a hero who had rescued the future from the hands of the past. This delusion allowed him to commit atrocities with a clean conscience. He was the architect of a new family, and he was the only one who knew the price. Every child in the project was stripped of their original identity and given the common surname Wesker. This served two distinct purposes for the organization. First, it stripped away their individual past and their connection to their biological families. They were no longer the sons and daughters of a specific lineage, but the children of a unified set. The name Wesker became their new identity and their only heritage in the world of the project. It was a brand that marked them as the property of the founder. Second, the name honored the project's lead director, a man whose work had defined the genetic screening process. By giving all the children the same name, Spencer turned them into a matching set of assets. It made them feel like part of an elite and unified lineage that was separate from the rest of humanity. They were taught that the name Wesker was a title of honor that represented their superior status. It was a psychological tool used to build a collective ego. They were a pack of wolves in a world of sheep. The name also allowed Umbrella Pharmaceuticals to track the candidates through a centralized database with ease. Every Wesker child had a serial number and a file that recorded their every academic and medical achievement. They were part of a corporate catalogue of high-value humans. The common name reinforced the idea that they were replaceable parts of a larger machine. If one Wesker failed, another was already being prepared to take their place. They were the interchangeable gods of a corporate pantheon. This branding was the final step in the dehumanization of the candidates. They were products of the company, and their name was the trademark of their creator. Even as they grew into adults and moved into the world, the name Wesker followed them like a shadow. It was a permanent reminder of the project that owned their life. They were the brothers and sisters of a manufactured family, tied together by a name they did not choose. It was a name that carried a weight of expectation and a promise of power. Spencer wanted the name Wesker to be a symbol of excellence that would one day rule the planet. He envisioned a future where every world leader and every scientist carried that surname. It was a way to ensure that his legacy would endure even after his physical death. The name was a viral agent in itself, spreading through the halls of power and replacing the old names of history. He was building a dynasty that was based on blood and science. The children were the vessels for that dynasty, and the name was the seal. Alongside exceptional intelligence, the Wesker children were placed in the finest schools and universities worldwide, all funded by Umbrella Pharmaceuticals front companies. They were given every resource needed to excel in their chosen fields of study. Spencer wanted them to be more than just soldiers. He wanted them to be the intellectual elite of the planet. They studied advanced science, complex combat, and deep philosophy under the best tutors money could buy. Every hour of their day was a part of a rigid and demanding curriculum. They were the refined minds of a new age. While they were learning, they were also being subtly indoctrinated with Spencer's cold world view. They were taught that the strong had a natural obligation to rule the weak and the stagnant. Their education was designed to foster a sense of superiority and a detached arrogance. They saw the rest of the student population as inferior beings who lacked their genetic potential. This indoctrination was the mental foundation for the new world order that Spencer envisioned. They were being taught how to be the masters of a world that did not know they existed. The children were pushed to their absolute limits in every physical and academic discipline. Failure was not an option in the Wesker program. Those who could not keep up with the demanding standards were quietly removed and discarded from the project. Only the most resilient and the most intelligent were allowed to continue toward the final stage. The education was a filter that selected for the mental stability required to survive the viral infection. It was a war of the mind that was just as dangerous as the war of the body. By the time they reached adulthood, the Wesker children were the most capable individuals in their respective fields. They were masters of science and tactical warfare, possessing a knowledge that surpassed their peers. They were the pride of the project, a group of high-value assets who were ready to take their place in the world. They were the refined human clay that Spencer was finally ready to carve into his new gods. Their education had turned them into weapons of pure intellect and will. They were the perfect students of a madman. Spencer ensured that their schooling included a deep understanding of the Progenitor Virus and its potential. They were taught that biology was a code that could be hacked and rewritten. This gave them a clinical view of life that matched the founder's own perspective. They did not see the beauty of nature. They saw the efficiency of the machine. Their education was a total overhaul of their human soul, replacing empathy with logic and ambition. They were the intellectual heirs to a kingdom of ashes, and they were ready to claim their throne. The children never knew they were part of a massive biological experiment. They believed they were simply gifted individuals who were being supported by a generous and mysterious benefactor. In reality, Umbrella Pharmaceuticals observers tracked their every move from a distance. Every grade, every medical record, and every psychological shift was recorded in a classified database. Spencer wanted to know everything about his children before he triggered the final phase of the plan. He was the silent god who watched them from the shadows. The company used a network of undercover agents to monitor the candidates through their daily lives. These observers posed as friends, teachers, and colleagues, reporting back to the headquarters with regular updates. The candidates lived in a world of total surveillance that was invisible to them. Every romantic relationship and every professional achievement was analyzed for its impact on their genetic stability. They were living in a cage of corporate observation that spanned the entire globe. Their freedom was a carefully managed illusion provided by their creator. Medical exams were conducted under the guise of routine health checks to monitor their physiological development. Spencer was looking for any signs of genetic degradation or unexpected mutations before the viral introduction. He wanted to ensure that the host was in peak condition for the final harvest. The monitoring was a cold and clinical process that treated the humans as nothing more than valuable lab animals. Their privacy was a luxury that the project did not afford. Every heartbeat was a data point for a scientist in a lab. This decade-long observation allowed Spencer to pick the right moment for the final infection. He watched as his children grew into the leaders and the scientists he had imagined. He was waiting for the exact point where their physical and mental development reached its absolute peak. The monitoring was the final test of their worthiness. Only those who remained stable under the pressure of their elite lives would be allowed to face the prehistoric fire. He was a patient man who was willing to watch them grow for 40 years. The data gathered during this period was also used to refine the prototype virus. Spencer wanted to tailor the strain to the specific genetic profiles of the Wesker children. This level of precision was only possible because of the decades of constant monitoring. He was building a key for the lock he had manufactured. The candidates were the final proof of his genius, and he was not going to let them fail. He was the man who owned their past, and he was the man who was about to decide their future. The harvest was coming, and he was ready. The program was named after its lead researcher, Dr. Wesker, who oversaw the early genetic screening for the Alliance. He was a brilliant scientist who shared the cold vision of the founder. He developed the initial methodology for filtering the human genome to find the rare markers of compatibility. His work provided the scientific backbone for the entire project during the 1960s. He was the man who turned a eugenics theory into a practical corporate operation. His role in shaping the children was both genetic and psychological in its scope. He established the baseline standards for the Wesker name and the expectations for their development. He believed that the children should be treated as high-value assets rather than human individuals. This detached perspective was integrated into every part of the monitoring process. He was the architect of the clinical environment that the candidates called home. His influence was felt in every classroom and every medical clinic. Dr. Wesker focused on the intersection of biological potential and mental resilience. He wanted to ensure that the children possessed a robust nervous system capable of handling the viral load. He designed the early tests that filtered the hundreds of candidates into a manageable group. His methodology was a ruthless exercise in data collection and human pruning. He did not care about the casualties of the screening process. To him, the project was a masterpiece of biological engineering that required absolute precision. Though he eventually disappeared from the corporate records, his work remained the blueprint for the project. Some files suggest that he was quietly removed once his primary task was completed. Spencer did not like to share the credit for his divine vision with anyone, but the name Wesker remained as a permanent tribute to the doctor's technical contribution. He had given the gods a name and a foundation. His disappearance only added to the mystery of the project's secret origins. The legacy of Dr. Wesker was a generation of humans who were built to be superior. He had identified the threads of greatness in the human pool and woven them into a unified set. His filtering process ensured that only the strongest candidates reached the final stage. He was the silent father of the Wesker lineage, who vanished into the shadows of the company. His work was the bridge between the ancient virus and the modern host. He had prepared the clay for the final harvest. Part 11. Why? 13. How the final candidates were chosen. From hundreds of children raised over decades. Out of the hundreds of children who started the program, only 13 reached the final stage of adulthood. This reduction was the result of decades of intense physical and mental filtering. Spencer wanted only the absolute peak of the project's success to face the prehistoric fire. These 13 candidates represented the finest genetic material that the human race had to offer. They were the survivors of a corporate war of attrition that started in the nursery. The selection of the final 13 was based on their stability under extreme pressure. Umbrella observers watched as the candidates faced the challenges of their elite lives. Those who showed signs of mental weakness or physical degradation were quietly discarded from the database. Only those who maintained a perfect record of achievement were allowed to remain in the project. The 13 were the ones who had never blinked in the face of the founders' expectations. They were the pride of the project. These candidates were the chosen few who possessed the necessary genetic markers for viral integration. Spencer believed that these 13 individuals had the best chance of surviving the progenitor virus infection. They were the result of a multi-billion-dollar investment in human perfection. Each one was a master of their field, possessing an intellect and a strength that surpassed the natural limit. They were a unified group of gods who were ready to claim their inheritance. The number 13 was a calculated choice that reflected the scale of the experiment. Spencer wanted a large enough sample size to ensure at least one successful adaptation, but he also wanted a small enough group to maintain total security and control. The 13 candidates were moved into high-level positions within the company and the government. They were the hidden hands of the founder, waiting for the signal to start the final phase. They were the culmination of 40 years of biological theft. By the time the final stage was triggered, the 13 were the most dangerous people on the planet. They were the refined products of a cold and industrial eugenics vision. They had no idea that their lives were about to be tested by a prehistoric predator. They were the final pieces on Spencer's global chessboard, and the game was about to reach its end. The selection of the 13 was the last act of the architect before the harvest began. They were the bridge to the new world. Part 12. The infection method. How each of the 13 was injected with the prototype virus without knowing it was coming. In 1998, Spencer finally triggered the final stage of the Wesker plan. Each candidate was surreptitiously injected with a prototype virus strain during a routine medical checkup. They were told that the injection was a standard booster for a new type of vaccine. Because they trusted the company that had supported them for decades, they did not question the procedure. They had no idea that they were being exposed to a potential death sentence. The betrayal was silent and clinical. The infection method was designed to minimize the risk of a panicked host reaction. Spencer wanted the virus to enter the system, while the candidate was in a state of calm stability. He used a network of trusted medical professionals and undercover observers to administer the dose. The candidates were watched for hours after the injection to record the initial physiological response. It was a cold and detached harvest of the genetic assets that Spencer had raised. The gods were being baptized in fire. The prototype virus was a refined derivative of the progenitor virus strain. It was designed to trigger a rapid genetic restructuring of the host's DNA. The virus would either grant the host a divine power or destroy them within minutes. There was no middle ground in the final stage of the project. The candidates were the only ones who did not know that they were part of a biological lottery. Their lives were the stakes in a game that Spencer had been playing for 40 years. Spencer watched the results through a live feed from the monitoring stations across the globe. He wanted to see which of his children would rise to the level of a king. The infection was the final test of their worthiness and their genetic potential. He did not care about the casualties of the process. He only cared about the survival of the master race. The 13 were being pushed through the eye of a needle. It was the most important moment in the history of the project. The unwitting nature of the infection was the final proof of Spencer's total control. He owned their bodies, their minds, and their very survival. He had built them for this moment, and he was not going to let them choose their own fate. The candidates went about their daily lives as the virus began its aggressive work. They were the walking dead or the rising gods, depending on a sequence of genetic code. The architect was finally ready to see the results of his labor. Part 13. 11 dead. What the virus did to the 11 who didn't survive, and what that confirmed about the program. The result of the final stage was a massive biological massacre. 11 of the 13 candidates suffered an immediate and violent physiological rejection. Their bodies could not handle the rapid genetic restructuring forced by the prototype virus. They died in agony as their internal organs failed and their cells began to dissolve. The deaths were a visceral record of the lethality of the Progenitor Virus legacy. It was an industrial failure that left a pile of elite corpses. The rejection confirmed that even superior genetics were often not enough to tame the prehistoric fire. The 11 candidates were the peak of human perfection, but they were still too weak for the virus. Their deaths proved that compatibility was a rare and elusive gift that could not be manufactured through schooling alone. Spencer watched as his billions of dollars in investment were erased in a single night of cellular decay. It was a humbling reminder of the limits of corporate science. The physiological breakdown was a fast and messy process that overwhelmed the medical teams. The candidates suffered from massive internal bleeding and total nervous system collapse. Their bodies were literally consumed by the viral replication before they could adapt. This confirmed that the Progenitor Virus was a judge that did not care about status or ambition. It only cared about the cold reality of the DNA. The 11 were the soil that the final survivors would grow from. Spencer used the data from the deaths to refine his understanding of the compatibility markers. He analyzed why the 11 failed while the others survived. Every corpse was a data point that clarified the vision of the architect. He saw that the project required an even higher level of genetic resilience than he had imagined. But the massacre was not a failure to Spencer, but a necessary pruning of the weak branches. He was looking for the one who would endure. The deaths of the 11 marked the end of the original Wesker family. The candidates who had been raised as brothers and sisters were now nothing but medical waste. The common name had not saved them from the common fate of the human species. Their names were erased from the files, leaving only a serial number and a cause of death. The project had narrowed its focus down to the rare survivors who could carry the fire. The harvest was complete, and the gods had been chosen. Part 14. Albert Wesker, the one candidate who gained superhuman abilities, and what made his biology different. Albert Wesker was the ultimate anomaly that justified 40 years of corporate horror. During the 1998 Mansion incident, he was impaled by a high-level tyrant asset in the secret Arklay laboratory. This injury would have been fatal for any other human being on the planet. But the prototype virus in his blood reacted to the trauma by triggering a total biological reanimation. Instead of dying on the floor, Albert's heart rebooted with a prehistoric energy. He rose from the dead as the first successful product of the Eugenics dream. The virus granted him a suite of superhuman abilities that surpassed any natural limit. He gained a physical speed that allowed him to move faster than the human eye could track. His strength was amplified to a point where he could shatter bone with a single strike. He possessed a regenerative healing factor that could close lethal wounds in seconds. Albert was no longer a human host. He was a biological god inhabiting a human shape. He was the proof that the Progenitor Virus could be tamed by the right host. What made his biology different was a rare and perfect compatibility with the viral load. His genetic code possessed the specific markers that allowed the body to integrate with the virus without suffering a cellular collapse. This stability was the result of the decades of screening and the elite training he had received. Albert was the one in a million fluke that Spencer had spent billions of dollars to find. He was the realization of the founder's obsession, a being of pure power and cold intellect. He was the champion of the Wesker project. The physical transformation was accompanied by a total psychological shift. Albert realized that he was no longer a pawn in a corporate game, but the master of his own fate. He saw the world as a collection of inferior organisms that were beneath his notice. His arrogance was now backed by a divine power that made him the most dangerous man on earth. He felt no loyalty to the company or the architect who had built him. He was a predator who had finally grown his teeth, and he was ready to hunt. His survival was the final validation of the Project W methodology. Spencer saw in Albert the future of the species, a host who could handle the fire and rule the ruins. The data from Albert's adaptation was used to refine the next generation of bioweapons and viral strains. He was the living gold standard for human evolution. But Spencer had made a fatal mistake in his planning. He had built a god who was too intelligent to serve a human master. Albert was a creation that was destined to destroy its creator. The superhuman speed was the most iconic trait of his new existence. He could move with such velocity that he appeared to vanish in a cloud of dust. This ability made him nearly untouchable in a tactical engagement, even against the best STARS veterans. He combined this speed with a clinical combat style that emphasized efficiency and lethality. Albert was the perfect soldier of a new era, a man who had moved beyond the need for traditional weapons. He was the weapon, and he was hungry for more power. He spent the years following his reanimation, building his own private empire. He stole viral samples and gathered intelligence on every global biohazard. He was preparing for a final confrontation with the man who had stolen his childhood. Albert saw himself as the true heir to the prehistoric fire. He was the son who was going to kill the father and take the throne for himself. His existence was a permanent threat to the natural order of the planet. He was the last Wesker child, and he was just getting started. Part 15. Alex Wesker, the one candidate. Spencer trusted with the truth and the task he gave her privately. Alex Wesker was the only other successful survivor of the 1998 final stage. While Albert was a field agent focused on tactical power, Alex was a brilliant researcher with a profound scientific intellect. She possessed the same genetic stability as her brother, but her strengths were focused on the mind. Spencer saw in Alex a loyalty that he did not see in Albert. He trusted her with the true goal of the project, which was the discovery of a path to biological immortality. She was his favorite child. Spencer gave Alex a private task known as sushchestvovanie, which is the Russian word for existence. This was a highly classified project focused on the transfer of human consciousness into a younger host. The elderly founder realized that his own body was failing, and he wanted Alex to find a way to let him live forever in a new form. He gave her unlimited resources and a secret facility on Sonido de Tortuga to conduct her research. She was the architect of his final hope for survival. She was the one who held the keys to his future. Alex spent years studying the relationship between the human soul and the viral load. She believed that physical immortality was a secondary goal compared to the preservation of the mind. She wanted to find a way to map the human personality and move it between biological vessels. This research was even darker than the work being done in the Arklay labs. It involved the total erasure of the host's identity to make room for the new consciousness. Alex was a cold and detached researcher who saw humans as nothing more than temporary containers for data. Unlike Albert, who was open about his hatred for Spencer, Alex operated with a deceptive loyalty. She pretended to serve the founder's vision, while she secretly harbored her own plans for godhood. She realized that the search for Spencer's immortality was also the path to her own. She began to divert resources to her private experiments, building a hidden legacy that surpassed her father's. She was the most dangerous type of monster, a genius who could smile while she planned your extinction. She was the shadow queen of the Wesker lineage. Her biology was just as refined as Albert's, granting her a long lifespan and an exceptional physical resilience. But Alex preferred to work in the background, using her mind to manipulate the world around her. She saw herself as the intellectual superior to her brother, a woman who understood the true meaning of the progenitor legacy. She was not interested in being a soldier. She wanted to be a goddess who ruled through the control of the human soul. She was the quiet fire that was burning beneath the surface of the project. Spencer's trust in Alex was his ultimate blind spot. He believed that he had molded her mind so perfectly that she could never betray him. He saw her as an extension of his own will, a loyal servant who would bring him the gift of eternal life. But Alex was a product of the same social Darwinism that he had taught her. She saw her father as a stagnant old man who was in the way of the future. She was a Wesker child, and that meant she was built to survive at any cost, even the cost of her creator's life. The task of finding immortality led Alex to develop the T-phobos virus in the years following the fall of Umbrella. This strain was designed to weed out those who could not overcome their own fear. She believed that fear was the final barrier to the evolution of the mind. She used the isolated island of Sagem Island as her laboratory, she conducting experiments on a civilian population to find a compatible host for her own consciousness. She was the dark twin of the project, a woman who had taken the eugenics vision and turned it into a psychological nightmare. Part 16, Albert's Path After Infection. How Spencer's creation turned on Spencer and built his own agenda. Once Albert realized that he was just a pawn in a 40-year game of biological chess, his loyalty vanished instantly. He saw the company and the founder as a limitation on his own divine potential. He spent the next decade operating in the shadows of the global bioterrorism market, amassing a massive amount of power. He was no longer a loyal agent of Umbrella. He was a private player with his own agenda. He spent his days stealing viral samples from every major outbreak, including the T virus and the G virus. He was building a catalogue of death. Albert also recognized the potential of the Las Plagas parasite found in Europe. He saw that the combination of viral and parasitic material could create a more stable and controllable weapon. He sent operatives like Ada Wong to secure the samples he needed to refine his research. He was building a private army of BOW assets that would follow his every command. He wanted to take Spencer's eugenics vision and scale it to a level that the founder could never imagine. He was the architect of a new world that had no room for the old masters. His agenda was defined by a total rejection of human empathy and social morality. He saw himself as the only one worthy of leading the species into the future. He spent his time manipulating the remaining fragments of Umbrella and the various rival companies. He was a master of the long game, using his superhuman speed and intellect to stay 3 steps ahead of the BSUA. He was the ghost that haunted the international security community, a man who could appear anywhere and destroy anything. He was the god who was finally coming to claim his throne. The path he took was one of total destruction for the old world. He wanted to unleash a global infection that would filter the human race once and for all. This was the birth of the Uroboros project, a plan to release a refined Progenitor Virus derivative into the atmosphere. He believed that this was the final fulfillment of the Project W dream. He was the creation that had surpassed its creator, a biological monster who was ready to judge the entire planet. He was a man with a god complex that was backed by a physical reality. Albert's path also included a deep dive into the history of the Spencer family. He wanted to know everything about the man who had stolen his childhood. He spent years tracking down the secret files and the hidden estates of the founder. He was not looking for a reconciliation. He was looking for a target. He wanted to look Spencer in the eyes and tell him that he had failed. He was the son who was coming home to kill the father. This personal vendetta was the engine that drove his tactical planning for over a decade. By the time he reached the year 2006, Albert was the most powerful individual in the history of biological warfare. He had the viral samples, the tactical assets, and the superhuman strength needed to win any conflict. He had moved beyond the need for corporate funding or political support. He was a self-sustaining entity who ruled through fear and force. He was the physical manifestation of the Wesker name, a name that was now synonymous with the end of the world. He was the god of the ruins. His path was a dark reflection of the very values Spencer had taught him. He believed that the strong had a natural right to rule, and he was the strongest being on the planet. He saw the Project W experience as a necessary fire that had forged his soul. He did not care about the 11 who had died, or the sister who was hiding in the snow. He only cared about his own evolution and his own dominance. He was the final product of a madman's vision, and he was ready to burn the laboratory down. Part 17. Alex's Path. The Immortality Research. She was assigned, and how it ended. Alex's path took her to the isolated islands of the north, where she could conduct her research away from the prying eyes of the BSAA. She was focused on the project known as Sushchestvovani, attempting to find a way to transfer her consciousness into a younger host. She realized that her biological body, while superior, was still subject to the ravages of time. She saw Spencer's focus on physical immortality as a failure of imagination. She believed that a true goddess must be able to move between vessels like a viral infection. She was the researcher of the soul. She developed the T-Phobos virus as a tool for her consciousness transfer project. She believed that the host must possess a strong will and an absence of fear to be worthy of her mind. She used the prisoners and the civilians on Same Island as her test subjects, watching as they succumbed to the fear-based mutations. She was looking for the 1 in a million host who could look into the darkness and not blink. This clinical cruelty was the core of her scientific methodology. She was a woman who saw the human mind as a sequence of code that could be copied. Her path ended in a desperate struggle for survival on the island. She identified a young girl named Natalia Korda as the perfect host for her transfer project. Natalia had survived the Terra Grigia panic without feeling fear, making her the ideal vessel for Alex's mind. Alex attempted to initiate the transfer, but the process was interrupted by the arrival of Claire Redfield and Barry Burton. The goddess of the island was forced to face the reality of her own mortality. She realized that her intellectual superiority was not enough to protect her from the human spirit. The research she was assigned ended in a grotesque mutation of her own body. In her desperation to survive, she injected herself with a variant of the virus, turning into a twisted nightmare of skin and bone. She had become the very thing she despised, a mindless monster driven by raw aggression. Her path was a cautionary tale about the limits of human ambition. She had tried to play God with the soul, and she had ended up losing her own. She was the favorite child who had fallen the furthest from the light. Despite her physical death, a part of her consciousness successfully moved into Natalia. This was the final and most terrifying legacy of her path. She had achieved a form of immortality that was invisible to the world. A young girl was now carrying the mind of a Wesker child, a viral intelligence that was waiting for the right moment to wake up. Alex had won the war for the soul, even if she had lost the war for the island. She was the ghost in the machine that was still haunting the franchise. Alex's path showed that the Wesker name was about more than just physical power. It was about a total commitment to the evolution of the species, regardless of the cost. She had taken the work of Dr. Wesker and the vision of Spencer and moved them into the realm of the psychological. She was the most refined product of the project, a woman who understood that the true king rules from the inside. Her research was a dark mirror of her brother's tactical war, sheer war for the mind that was still ongoing. Her legacy on the island remained a secret for years, a hidden chapter in the history of the Wesker project. The BSAA recovered her notes and her viral samples, but they did not realize the true nature of her success. They saw a monster that had been defeated, but they did not see the mind that had escaped. Alex was the only one who truly understood what it meant to be a god. She was the one who had shedding her human skin and entered the realm of the eternal. She was the final secret of the architect. Part 18. Spencer's death. How his own project's most successful product came back and killed him. In 2006, the long history of the Project W experiment reached its final and violent conclusion. Albert Wesker finally tracked down his creator to a remote and ancient estate in Europe. He arrived to find Oswell E. Spencer waiting for him in a wheelchair, surrounded by the remnants of his fading empire. The founder was a frail and dying man who was still clinging to the dream of his master race. He believed that he could still control the god he had manufactured. He expected Albert to serve him as the loyal son of the project. Spencer revealed the full truth of the Wesker project to Albert during their final confrontation. He told him about the abductions, the renaming, and the brutal filtering of the 13 candidates. He expected Albert to be grateful for the gifts he had been given. He saw himself as the father who had liberated Albert from a mundane life and turned him into a superior being. But Albert did not see a father. He saw a parasite. He realized that every achievement of his life was just a data point in a madman's ledger. The betrayal was complete. The founder's arrogance was his final mistake. He told Albert that the right to be a god belonged only to the one who had built the throne. He believed that his intellect and his vision gave him the authority to rule over his creation. But Albert was the physical manifestation of the very social Darwinism that Spencer had taught him. He realized that the right to be a god belonged to the strongest, and he was the strongest being in the room. He did not need a creator who was too weak to stand. He was the future, and Spencer was the stagnant past. Albert thrust his hand through Spencer's chest with a superhuman force, ending the life of the architect in a single moment of violence. The man who had built Umbrella and planned the extinction of the human race, died as a frail old man in a cold room. He was killed by the very project he had called his masterpiece. It was a fitting end for a man who had traded the world for a chance to live forever. He had built a god who had no use for a king. The cycle of betrayal was finally closed. The death of Spencer marked the official end of the original Umbrella era. The secrets of the African Garden and the Project W experiment were now in the hands of the creation. Albert stood over the body of his father and declared that the right to be a god belonged to him alone. He had shed the last of his human ties and fully embraced his identity as a superior being. He was the one who would now decide the fate of the planet. He was the god who had earned his throne through the murder of his maker. Spencer's estate became a tomb for the eugenics vision of the 20th century. The files and the viral samples were consumed by the darkness as Albert moved on to his next objective. He had closed the door on his past and was now looking toward the global culling of the Uroboros project. He was the most successful product of the project, and he was the one who had delivered the final judgment on its creator. He was the son who had grown too large for the house, and he had burned it down on his way out. The death of the founder left a power vacuum that the rest of the world is still trying to fill. Without Spencer's central authority, the viral market became a chaotic and decentralized mess. The BSAA and the various syndicates began to scramble for the remains of the project. But the true legacy of the man was the god who was now walking the earth. Spencer had wanted to build a master race, but he had only succeeded in building the world's most dangerous predator. He died, realizing that he was just a footnote in the history of the creature he had built. Part 19, the Uroboros Project. How Albert took Spencer's ideology and scaled it to global extinction. The Uroboros Project was the final evolution of the eugenics vision that began in the West African Garden. Following the death of his creator, Albert Wesker took the core principles of Project W and prepared to apply them to the entire human population. He no longer wanted a private group of elite gods. He wanted a global culling that would decide the fate of the species in a single moment. He spent years refining the Progenitor Virus into the Uroboros strain, a viral agent designed to be the ultimate judge of genetic worthiness. He viewed the world as a stagnant pool that required a violent purification to move forward. The virus functioned as a rapid screening tool that reacted to the specific DNA of the host. If a person possessed the superior genes that Spencer had spent decades searching for, they would evolve into a new form of human life. If the host was found lacking, the virus would react with a total biological aggression, consuming the body and turning it into a mass of black parasitic cysts. This was the mechanical realization of the Nipaya King's selection ritual on an industrial scale. Albert saw himself as the high priest of this new religion, overseeing the extinction of the weak from his Mobile laboratory. The Kijuju incident in 2009 was the designated field test for this global reset. Albert utilized the resources of Tricell to manufacture the virus in massive quantities, intending to release it into the atmosphere via a high-altitude bomber. He believed that the resulting chaos was a necessary stage in the birth of a new world. He did not care about the billions of people who would be liquidated by the infection. To him, they were just biological waste that was hindering the progress of the gifted. He was the only one with the cold will to push the button. The physical nature of the Uroboros failure was a nightmare of thrashing tentacles and black sludge. It proved that the vast majority of the modern population was fundamentally incompatible with the prehistoric fire. Even Albert himself had to struggle to maintain control over the virus when he eventually bonded with it during the final battle. The project showed that the dream of a master race was built on a foundation of total destruction. Jean Albert had taken Spencer's ideology to its logical conclusion, a world where only the monsters remained. He was the god of a dying planet. The tactical deployment of the virus was a masterpiece of scientific planning. Albert had accounted for the wind currents and the population centers to ensure the maximum level of exposure. He wanted the filtering process to be absolute and inescapable for every man, woman, and child. This was the peak of the Wesker ambition, a plan that transformed the planet into a massive laboratory. He had moved beyond the need for corporate fronts or political influence. He was a force of nature that was about to erase the human story and start a new one written in his own blood. The defeat of Albert Wesker at the hands of the BSAA was the only thing that prevented the total realization of the project. The destruction of the bomber in the volcano ended the threat of a global Uroboros outbreak, but the data remained. The world had seen what a Wesker child was capable of when they fully embraced the eugenics dream. Albert died believing that he was the only one who truly understood the potential of the species. He was the son who had carried the father's fire until it consumed him. His legacy was a world that was now permanently afraid of its own DNA. The project proved that the Wesker name was synonymous with the end of days. Albert had spent his entire life being molded by a madman, and he had returned the favor by becoming a bigger madman. He had turned the science of evolution into the science of mass murder. The Uroboros project was the final act of a project that was designed to build a throne for a god. Albert was the king of the ruins, a man who had traded his humanity for a power that the world could not survive. He was the ultimate product of the Spencer God complex, and he died in the fire. Part 20, Alex's Endgame on Sonido de Tortuga, the final chapter of a Wesker child, pursuing her own version of Spencer's dream. While Albert was focused on a global culling, Alex Wesker pursued a more sophisticated path toward the evolution of the species. She believed that physical immortality was a primitive goal that neglected the true potential of the human mind. On the isolated island of Sonido de Tortuga, she conducted her secret research into the transfer of human consciousness. She viewed the body as a temporary vessel that could be replaced, while the soul was the only thing worthy of being preserved. She wanted to achieve a state of digital or spiritual immortality that surpassed the biological limits. Alex saw the failure of Oswell E. Spencer as a failure of vision. He had stayed in a frail body for too long, waiting for a miracle that science could not provide in time. Alex intended to bypass this limitation by moving her mind into a young and vulnerable host. She identified Natalia Korda as the perfect candidate because of her unique ability to remain calm in the face of absolute terror. Alex spent years preparing the girl for the consciousness transfer, viewing her as the empty vessel for the Wesker soul. She was the goddess who intended to live forever in a new skin. The transfer process was a dark and clinical experiment that required the total erasure of the host's original identity. Alex used a combination of viral material and psychological conditioning to map her personality onto Natalia's brain. She believed that this was the final realization of the Project W dream. If a Wesker could move from host to host, they would be truly eternal. They would be a viral intelligence that could never be killed by a vaccine or a bullet. Alex was the researcher who had found the back door to heaven. The endgame on the island was a tragic display of her cold ambition. She used the local population and the prisoners of the BSAA as test subjects for her T. Phobos virus. refining the strain until it was ready for her own use. She watched with a detached arrogance as the world around her descended into a nightmare of fear and mutation. She did not see the people as human beings, but as data points in her search for the perfect transfer. She was a woman who had fully embraced the elitism of her creator. She was the shadow queen of the island. Her plan ultimately failed when her own physical body succumbed to the pressure of the viral infection. In a moment of mortal panic, she injected herself with the virus, turning into a grotesque and deformed monster. This transformation was a visceral reminder that the Progenitor Virus does not care about intellect or planning. It only cares about the raw compatibility of the flesh. Alex died as a mindless beast, a fitting end for a woman who had tried to play God with the soul. She had lost the war for her own immortality in a moment of human weakness. However, the transfer was partially successful, leaving a trace of Alex's mind inside Natalia. This lingering presence is the true endgame of her research. She had achieved a form of life that was invisible and parasitic, a ghost that was waiting to wake up in a younger and stronger body. This was a much more dangerous result than any of Albert's tactical weapons. Alex had found a way to let the Wesker name survive, even after the laboratory was destroyed. She was the infection that could not be cured, because it looked like a child. Alex's story is the final chapter of the original Project W candidates. She had taken the Eugenics vision and moved it into the realm of the eternal. She proved that the name Wesker was not just about speed and strength, but about a total commitment to the survival of the ego. She was the favorite child because she was the one who understood the true nature of the architect's goal. She wanted to be the god who never died, and she was willing to steal a life to achieve it. The legacy of her work on the island is a shadow that still hangs over the future of the species. Part 21. Jake Muller, the unregistered Wesker child. Spencer never knew existed, and what his blood did Jake Muller is the ultimate wildcard in the history of the Wesker plan. As the biological son of Albert Wesker, he inherited the natural immunity and the genetic stability that Umbrella Pharmaceuticals spent billions of dollars trying to manufacture in a lab. He was the accidental product of a brief relationship his father had in Eastern Europe, a child who grew up in poverty without ever knowing his true lineage. Spencer never knew that Jake existed, making him the only Wesker child who was not shaped by the education program or the corporate indoctrination. Jake spent his life as a cynical mercenary, fighting in civil wars and selling his skills to the highest bidder. He lived a life of raw survival that was a stark contrast to the privileged upbringing of the other candidates, but his blood carried a power that the world was about to discover. During the global outbreak of 2013, it was revealed that Jake's DNA contained the antibodies needed to cure the C virus. He was the natural solution to a manufactured problem, a human being who was born with the gift that Spencer had tried to steal from the sun. The irony of Jake's existence is that he possessed the very superiority that Albert and Alex had killed for. He was physically resilient and naturally compatible with the viral load without the need for a prototype injection. He was the proof that nature could produce a god without the help of a corporate architect. His blood provided the foundation for the vaccine that saved the human race from the Neo-Umbrella War. He was the savior of the species, even though he carried the name of its greatest villain. He was the light born from the darkness. His role in the DSO operation in China was the first time he had to face the legacy of his father. He was hunted by the Ustanak, a massive BOW asset that was obsessed with capturing his genetic material. Jake had to realize that his blood was a commodity that the world would never stop fighting for. He chose to use his power for the benefit of humanity, rejecting the selfish God complex of Albert Wesker. This choice was the final failure of Spencer's vision. The strongest being was the one who chose to protect the weak. Jake represents the hope that the Wesker name can be redeemed. He is a man who was built by nature to be a king, but he chose to be a soldier for the truth. His natural immunity is a biological miracle that continues to be studied by the BSAA and the various international health organizations. He is a living asset who remains under the protection of the global security network. He is the only Wesker child who has a future that is not tied to the destruction of the world. He is the orphan who became a hero. The existence of an unregistered child proves that Spencer was never in total control of his project. There was a variable that he did not account for, a human element that escaped his spreadsheets. Jake is the reminder that life cannot be fully managed by a corporate entity. He is the anomaly that survived the fire and came back to heal the world. His story is a powerful contrast to the tragedy of the 13 candidates. He was the one who was left behind, and he was the one who mattered the most in the end. As the series moves forward, Jake remains a significant figure in the background of the biological war. He carries the physical power of a god, but the conscience of a man. He is the final legacy of Albert Wesker, a legacy that is focused on survival rather than extinction. His blood is the ultimate prize in the global market, a reality that keeps him on the run even after the vaccine was produced. He is the master race that Spencer wanted, but he is a race of one. He is the Wesker who chose to be human. Part 22. Zeno and the Clone. Question: whether Project W's shadow extended into RE9. The shadow of Project W continues to haunt the modern era, specifically in the rumors surrounding the Zeno project and the current state of the BSAA. In the years leading up to 2026, the international security community has noticed a disturbing trend in the production of high-level tactical assets. There are whispers of unmanned soldiers and cloned operatives who possess the same physical traits as the original Wesker children. This suggests that the genetic blueprints created by Spencer and Dr. Wesker are still being used by rogue elements within the government. The connections and the reformed Blue Umbrella have both been linked to the recovery of the Project W data. These organizations are not interested in the eugenics vision of a master race, but in the practical application of superior soldiers. They see the Wesker DNA as a high-value asset that can be mass-produced through cloning and genetic editing. This would allow them to build an army of gods who are completely loyal to their corporate masters. The dream of a master race has been replaced by the reality of a manufactured workforce. The village incident in 2021 provided the first physical evidence of this new era. The discovery of a BSAA soldier who was actually a biological machine proved that the organization had been compromised from within. It is highly likely that these soldiers are built using the data gathered during the monitoring of the 13 candidates. The Wesker name has been stripped of its humanity and turned into a serial number for a tactical product. The shadow of the Arclay lab has finally reached the highest levels of global power. Whether Resident Evil 9 will fully expose this clone conspiracy remains the biggest looming question in the franchise. Chris Redfield and his Hound Wolf unit are currently investigating the European headquarters of the BSAA, looking for the source of the biological soldiers. They are hunting a ghost that has been alive since the 1960s. The legacy of Project W is a virus that has infected the very institutions that were supposed to protect the world. The master race is no longer a vision. It is a manufacturing quota. The idea of a Zeno asset suggests a level of genetic stability that even Albert Wesker never achieved. If these clones can host a variety of viral strains without suffering a cellular collapse, they would be the ultimate weapons of mass destruction. The world would be facing an army of Wesker-level threats that have no ego and no morality. This is the final nightmare of the eugenics dream. A world where the gods are produced in a factory and sold to the highest bidder. The architect's god complex has been industrialized. This clone question also raises concerns about the survival of the original candidate's consciousness. If Alex Wesker could transfer her mind into Natalia, it is possible that other Wesker intelligences are waiting in the digital archives of the BSAA. The project may have moved beyond the biological and into the realm of the synthetic. The children of Spencer may never truly die as long as their data exists on a server, or they are a viral legacy that can be downloaded into a new host at any time. The war for the future is a war against a ghost. The legacy of Project W is a permanent part of the series' DNA. It is the story of a man who wanted to build a better human and ended up building a better monster. As long as the Wesker name exists, the world will never be safe from the ambition of the elite. The clones are just the latest chapter in a story of biological theft and corporate arrogance. The shadow of the project is growing longer as the series moves into the 2020s, a reminder that the past is never truly buried. The wolves are hunting the gods. Part 23. What Project W means for the whole franchise. Every major villain traces back to one man's god complex. Project W is the narrative heart of the Resident Evil franchise. Every major catastrophe, from the destruction of Raccoon City to the global war in Lanxiang, can be traced back to the god complex of Oswell E. Spencer. He was the one who discovered the Progenitor Virus and decided that it should be used to filter the human race. He was the one who funded the labs and hired the scientists who built the monsters. He was the architect of the apocalypse, a man who viewed the planet as a chessboard for his own immortality. The project represents the ultimate corruption of the scientific mind. It shows what happens when the study of life is divorced from the respect for the individual. Spencer and his researchers saw humans as nothing more than raw material for their experiments. They turned the miracle of evolution into a cold and industrial process of selection. This detached arrogance is the defining trait of every major villain in the series. They all believe that they have the right to decide who lives and who dies, based on a sequence of genetic code. The Wesker children were the physical manifestation of this corruption. They were the stolen lives that were ground up to fuel a madman's ambition. Even the successful survivors like Albert and Alex were victims of the project, their minds warped by a lifetime of indoctrination and violence. They were built to be gods, but they were only ever tools for a man who was afraid to die. The tragedy of the project is that it destroyed the very thing it was trying to perfect, the human spirit. It created monsters out of the best of the species. The legacy of the project is a world that is permanently scarred by the viral load. The Progenitor Virus is now a permanent part of the global ecosystem, a prehistoric predator that can never be fully contained. Every new strain and every new outbreak is a direct descendant of the work done in the Arklay labs. Spencer's God complex has created a world of constant crisis, where the only law is survival. He did not create a master race. He created a global graveyard where the survivors are just waiting for the next disaster. What Project W means for the franchise is that the enemy is not the virus, but the ambition of the men who use it. The viruses are just tools that reflect the morality of the host. In the hands of a madman, they are weapons of mass destruction. In the hands of a hero like Jake Muller, they are the source of a cure. The story of the Wesker plan is a story about the responsibility of power. It is a reminder that the right to rule is not something that can be manufactured in a laboratory. It is something that must be earned through empathy. The franchise began with a mansion in the woods, but it was really about the mind of the man who built it. Spencer's shadow hangs over every character and every mission. He is the original sinner of the Resident Evil universe, the one who invited the ancient fire back into the world. His project proved that you cannot build a god without destroying a man. The Wesker name is the brand of his failure, a permanent mark on the history of the human race. The project is over, but the fire is still burning. Ultimately, the story of the Wesker plan is a cautionary tale about the dangers of the elite. It shows that when a few people believe they are superior to the rest of the species, the result is always catastrophe. The master race was a lie told by a frail old man in a wheelchair. The true gods were the ones who fought to stay human in a world of monsters. The project produced a handful of superhuman predators, but it also produced a world of heroes who were willing to die to stop them. The architect is dead, but the wolves are still hunting. I hope you enjoyed. I've added some Resident Evil ambience for 10 or so minutes for those who are asleep, close, or just studying.